What's up, guys? Today we're talking about changing inducer motors and assemblies. I've got two inducer changeouts to show you. This may be a little bit long of a video, so grab your notepad and let's do it. This first one I'm going to show you is of a 90% furnace inducer changeout. These are a little different than 80s because everything's plastic. Our lovely assistant Jay is going to help us out today. You can see right when he gets to the furnace, he's going to shut the power off. Anytime you do any motor changeouts, any major electrical components on a furnace, or just working on it in general, you want to make sure you turn that power off so you don't arc anything out or get shocked yourself. So now that we've got the power off, we're going to start disassembling the motor. Now on these 90%ers, you're always going to have some sort of collar that holds the flue pipe to the inducer housing. He unscrewed those two hose clamps there. Now he's looking for the screws that actually fasten the inducer housing, the inducer assembly to the furnace itself. There's two up high, you can see it taking them out, and two down low. Each furnace is going to be a little different. There's brands you'll get familiar with. Some of them are harder to find. You should never have to really yank on the motors to get them off. As you can see here in a minute, it just kind of falls off there, especially after he gets this last screw out. Sometimes it'll stick a little bit with different types of gaskets and things that are used. Sometimes they just don't pull off as easy, but this one just kind of falls right off. Before we pull the inducer off all the way though, we're going to take a picture of how everything goes back together. I recommend this on really any part you change out. Even if it's very simple like this one, if you're new, it could be hard to remember where wires go, where ground wires land, all that kind of stuff. Right now he's disconnecting the power to the inducer. Sometimes that'll be a plug, sometimes that'll be little spades like you see there. Sometimes you may just have to cut the wire nut it back in. Again, it would take forever and it'd be a super long video to show you how every single inducer and every make and model comes apart and goes together. So you'll just disconnect the power. He took off the pressure switch line there. Some pressure switches are actually mounted on the inducer housing itself, so you have to take those off. Again, those pictures just help you remind you where those lines go, where everything goes. So you see how easy that pulled off? It's a little hard to get off the inducer itself, but very easy to pull off the housing. If you're yanking on it super hard, chances are you missed a screw. So now that you got everything out of there, you're going to take a look at how everything goes together, inspect the collector box, drain holes, everything like that. This one has a little bit of, it looks like leaking down that bottom drain hole. We want to make sure there's no corrosion left on that. We want to make sure there's no maybe pieces of inducer. That wheel is plastic and will come apart. You'll see that a little later in the video. So we want to make sure none of those pieces are stuck in there. Make sure there's nothing else we need to get for this furnace before we start reassembly. Now that we've got the inducer out, we're going to unbox the new one. You're going to make sure you keep all the bags, everything in the box. You normally have instructions for inducer motors. For all parts you may need to swap over from the old inducer or anything like that. So we're going to pull it out of the box here. We're going to double check that it's the same one. Visually look at it. It's not always going to be the same part number on inducers, but we can look at specs like RPMs, voltage, that kind of thing. Those should all be the same. Now we're going to go ahead, open the bag up that came with the inducer. You see we have a new O-ring for this inducer. Some have gaskets, some have grommets, some have O-rings. This happens to have the O-ring that goes right on the housing there. That little rubber piece was actually the boot that joins the inducer housing and the flue. We have some hose clamps, and then we have some wire leads if we need them. This particular furnace will not need them. In the other bag we have some spades. Again, we won't need those for this particular furnace, and some O-rings for those drains we're going to put on. Now we're going to go ahead and take a look at the instructions and make sure we know how to put this thing back together, what parts need to be replaced, all that kind of stuff. Now that we've got the inducer off, we've got everything unboxed, we know what parts we need to swap out, we've read the instructions, we're ready to start putting everything back together. First thing we're going to do is swap out this O-ring. Whenever it's an O-ring, an actual O-ring, you're going to want to swap it out. Some makes like Bryant, some Lennox models will actually have like sticky gaskets that are real kind of a pain to peel off, and they look pretty good once you take them off, so they really don't need to be replaced. This one, for sure, it's an O-ring, we want to change it out. So we pull the O-ring out, We clean off the housing. We want to make sure that's clean. We want to make sure the PVC that we're hooking back to is clean. Everything's cleaned up and ready to install our new inducer. Now that it's cleaned up, you're just going to take that new O-ring, slide it all the way around inside that little groove where you took the old one out of, and we will also install the drain grommets on the collector box itself as well. Right here he's pulling out these little pins that hold in that little choke plate as well. You see that choke plate comes out, and we can reinstall it into the new inducer. This does not come with a new choke plate. So as you can see, we'll just drop that in there, and then in the bag it comes with 3 little pins to put back into those holes. So you open those up and just put the pins right back in just like they came out. Now we got the choke plate on. We're going to put this little rubber hose thing over the top of the inducer. Again, this will join the inducer housing to the PVC flue that expels the exhaust gas out of the house. This is held in place by 2 hose clamps. We're going to go ahead and slide one on the inducer side and slide one on the top, and then we're ready to put the inducer back in place. Putting the inducer back in can be kind of tricky because you have to line up the housing with the collector box just right so the O-ring fits where it's supposed to, and you have to get the PVC onto that little boot. This one in particular is going to be kind of hard because you saw that piece of rubber was flattened. So now Jay's got to open that up to get the pipe in there, and then he's got to line up the inducer housing with the collector box just right. After some time spent struggling, we've now got the boot on to the PVC. Now it's time to line up the inducer with the collector box. Again, if you have to push really hard and it just doesn't feel like it's going into the groove, or your screw holes aren't lined up, chances are it's not on there right. That's the biggest indicator, is the screws should go in just fine, screw holes should be lined up perfectly, and it should be lined up pretty flush with the collector box. Now that we've got all that lined up, we're going to go ahead and put our screws back in. An important thing when dealing with especially plastic inducers is, if you notice, Jay doesn't snug that down all the way. He screws it in to where it barely touches the inducer housing, and that's all he does with his drill. We do this because our impacts have enough power will actually break the plastic, especially if you have a red one. So we take our screwdriver, our nut driver, and we usually tighten it down with that. That way we don't get it too tight, and we know that it's tight enough that nothing is going to leak. Now that the inducer is mounted, we can look at the pictures we took earlier if needed. We can reconnect the power wires and plug in the pressure switch hose back onto the inducer housing. After that, we'll want to tighten down the hose clamps that connect our inducer to our PVC flue. We'll treat these just like we treated the screws that hold the inducer housing onto the collector box. We want to start them with our drill, get them snug, and finish them off with our screwdriver. A couple things to pay attention to when tightening these down is making sure they're actually on the surface you're tightening down to. So on the inducer housing, we're going to make sure the hose clamp's not hanging off the inducer housing. Same as on the PVC flue, we want to make sure it's fully on those surfaces so it doesn't come loose after we leave the service call. Now we just want to double check the instructions, making sure we got all the parts that it came with changed out and that we put everything back together correctly. It is also good to inspect the old inducer that came off. This one has a big old crack down the middle of the wheel. Over time, the wheel would have just come apart and the furnace would stop functioning altogether. We also want to take pictures of things like this to show to our customers. We can then attach those pictures to the invoice we send to the customer. I have even taken the part to the customer just to boost their confidence and let them know that the part was in fact bad. Now we're going to double check our work, flip the power on, and make sure it fires up. Alright, and next we'll be working on this 80% furnace. I wanted to show you guys this style of inducer because this one we can actually rebuild. It's one of the only inducers we can do that to. Most of them just come as a whole assembly. So as you can see, Tyler's got the power off here. He's going to find the screws to get the inducer off the inducer housing. It's going to come off as an assembly, and you can buy this kit as an assembly, but it's a lot cheaper for our customers if we rebuild it, and it's really not that bad to do. So now that we got those screws out, you'll see that inducer just falls off. Again, if you have to yank and pull on it, chances are you got the wrong screws. That inducer just comes right out. There's a little Allen set screw that holds that wheel onto the housing. Sometimes you do have to cut this wheel off with a long Sawzall blade because that wheel can be seized onto the shaft. See, this one slipped right off. He's a lucky guy. Now we're going to go ahead and take those 3 screws off that are holding the plate that mounts the inducer motor to the plate that goes onto the housing on the furnace. You can see the ground screws attached there. Again, you can take pictures as you go if you're nervous about not remembering how to get it back together. These are fairly simple, but pictures are always helpful. Now that we got those screws out, you see those 2 plates separate. You'll see the 2 screws that hold on the motor and the gasket. When you replace these motors, you're going to want to get the gasket kit. It will come with that red gasket as well. Those are one of those sticky ones that I was talking about. They're very hard to get off, so unless they're real flat and they don't seal up against the other plate, I usually don't replace those. If you do, you got to scrape them pretty good to get that new one on there. So you pull those screws out and you'll see the motor just comes right off. Now we're going to go ahead and grab our new motor. We're going to put our cooling wheel on first. It is grooved and does go on the shorter shaft. And then you do have this little lock washer that slips on there. It's kind of tough sometimes, but you just push that down on there and that holds the cooling wheel in place. It goes all the way down to the motor, so you don't have to worry about getting the cooling wheel on there too far. Now we got that cooling wheel on there. You can see the little washer there pushed down all the way, and that's not going to come off. Now we're going to mount it back to our plate. One thing about mounting these, the screw holes are not threaded, and the screws are self-tapping. So you do have to use your drill here. You have to be really careful though, because they're very easy to strip out or the screws will break. And there's not really a way to get those screws out when they do break, or you strip out that motor. We'll just have to get another one. So go very slow, and again, you just want to touch it to the plate and then finish it off with your screwdriver. Just make sure it's tight, not going to go anywhere. Now that that's all mounted and snugged up, if you need to, now would be the time to replace that middle gasket. Again, most of the time you're not going to have to do that. So next we'll put the second plate on and reinstall those screws. Also in the rebuild kit are those black grommets. They already got swapped out, but over time they'll kind of sag down, the inducer will hit the housing, that kind of thing, so we do want to replace those as well. Those just push right out of that plate and then you push the new ones back in. After we've got that all screwed together, we're going to go ahead and take the wheel, reinstall that, or put the new one on if you had to cut it off. You want to make sure the shaft is about the same depth into the hub as it was when you pulled it off. You don't want it too far in or too far out because you'll hit the housing. Again, there's a little set screw you just put in. I usually just loosen them up. Tyler took this out here, kind of personal preference there. You're going to hold the wheel in place exactly where you want it while you tighten that down. Once it's tight down on the set screw, it shouldn't move. You should be able to kind of pull on that motor back and forth, and it shouldn't move at all. You can give it a snug with a wrench if you'd like. Some people do, some people don't. Now we're going to go ahead and reinstall that inducer. Before this step, you will also want to change the gasket out on the housing that you're screwing to. If you don't have a gasket or they didn't have gaskets in stock, when you're going metal to metal, you can use red or black silicone, any high heat rated silicone. I try not to use too much so it's not oozing all over the furnace, and don't get it all over yourself because it never comes off. But you'll put those 3 screws back in place. Once you get everything buttoned up, you'll want to spin that cooling wheel on the back. That should spin everything. If you hear any weird noises, any pinging inside the inducer housing, anything like that, you want to pull that off and just make sure your inducer wheel is still set right. It's not falling off or hitting on the housing or anything like that. Now we can go ahead and hook the power back up. Doesn't matter which wire goes to which spade on this one. Sometimes these do have an adapter plug, but you should be able to look in the instructions and find out how to put that in if needed. Now that it's all installed and wired up, you can kick it on, make sure it works, and that's how you install an inducer. Thanks for watching.